I've been able to work with a number of younger adults in their 20s over the last couple of years, and many of them did not have any established credit whatsoever. No credit card, no loans, nothing. And for each of them, as we approach this idea of whether or not to even apply for a credit card, to use a tool like that, or to avoid it, we go through these education steps. And one of them that I share with them and that I want to make sure our listeners hear is that there are rules for using that tool. And if you have a credit card, the number one rule to a credit card to avoid making a terrible mess and getting yourself into a lot of danger is don't charge anything to the credit card you don't already have the cash to pay for. Now, somebody really smart might ask, well, then why bother using the credit card? And for me, it's about
Welcome to the Christ-Centered Stewardship Podcast with your hosts, Maria Casillas and Nino Villa. Christ-Centered Stewardship is a ministry of new money habits designed to equip believers to steward everything God has given them, including their time, talent, and treasure in ways that bring Him honor, glory, and praise. You can join our growing community on Facebook and submit your questions to podcast at newmoneyhabits.com. Now, to begin today's episode, here is Maria Casillas and Nino Villa.
All right, Maria, the question of the day is, should we avoid using loans and credit cards altogether, or is there a better way?
Well, the psychology in me says there's probably a better way than just pure avoidance, but I'm curious to see what you think about this.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. As you and I talk about often, I don't like all or nothing mentality. And my thoughts and my feelings on this have changed and evolved over time. Let me start by saying debt comes with a big warning in the Bible, and I never want to downplay that warning. Right? And so instead of simply avoiding, though, I don't like the idea of just simple avoidance. I'd rather educate, equip, so that when something is used, somebody can use it safely, wisely, and in a way that benefits them. So there's an analogy I have about this idea that knives are more dangerous than spoons. But it doesn't mean I'm going to avoid learning how to use the knife safely and effectively for the purposes in which it's intended. Cutting a steak with a spoon, I would imagine, is nearly impossible. So I'd rather learn how to use the tool wisely than to avoid it altogether in this particular situation.
Yeah, and as you brought that up, I couldn't help but try to picture somebody trying to eat soup with a knife. It's like...
Exactly right.
So yeah, there are uses for all these different tools, which I think is great. I think especially, so I have a couple of teenage kids who are, well, teenage to young adult at this point. And I think one of the things that we have to remember, especially as parents, is that our kids will be exposed to this stuff. And they're going to have some decisions to make down the line. And I think that if all we give them is, debt bad, everything else good, we're going to take away their agency, really. Like, they're not allowed to really make their own decisions because all they're doing is making the one decision that was kind of placed on their lap for them. If they haven't had the opportunity to really discuss through that, what does that look like? Why would one say that it's risky? Why would one say that why would somebody else say that it's strategic, and just being able to walk them through the different terms around that and how it really works. I mean, even if the ultimate goal is for you to land on them not using credit ever, we're not even saying that that's a bad thing if that's what they decide to do. But let them decide that based on truth and based on knowledge and based on wisdom.
Yeah. I think it ties to this idea that I like to empower people to make informed decisions. And if the only information is you must avoid debt at all costs in every situation, I don't think that that's fair. I
Yeah.
think that that is short-sighted. And so I think education is important. Understanding what debt is, how debt is used, the dangers of that debt, and the benefits of that debt. And so I'd much rather just train my children up in all of the information and then, like you said, giving them the opportunity to make decisions based on that. And earlier I said that my thinking on this has evolved a little bit. It's shifted over time, and it's because of a couple of factors. One, when I first started eliminating debt, when Christina and I sat down to do that in 2012, we cut up every single credit card. I called every single one and canceled them. And at the time, we had like 13 different credit cards. All of them gone. And that was fine when I had a job that prepaid for my travel and did other things where I didn't have to assume costs and responsibilities. Well, fast forward a couple of years, I start freelancing and doing some independent work, and it meant there was some travel that was going to be reimbursed, but not prepaid. And all of a sudden, I had a decision to make. Was I going to prepay all of these expenses using my own checking account and my cash and depleting my reserves? Or was I going to rethink this whole credit card usage thing, allow myself to put those expenses on a credit card, use somebody else's money until those expenses were reimbursed so that I could then pay it off? And this was just one of multiple things that happened that just challenged the way I was thinking about credit. I was in avoidance. Nope, I'm not going to use it. No, I've been told not to use it. It's bad, and so I'm not going to. And then these events started to challenge the way I was thinking.
Yeah, which, I think is a journey that most people go on. Even the individuals who land on, I'm never going to use debt again, usually have a story behind that. There's a personal journey that has kind of taken them up and down, and probably feeling very, very down at some points, that's sort of gotten them in trouble. And so in their situation, the band-aid and or the cure for that has been just complete avoidance. And so I do see how that can be something where somebody would land. I just don't want it to be something that somebody feels they need to start at because of other people's journeys, because that just feels a little bit short-sighted, to use your words from earlier.
Yeah. In my evolution of understanding, this tool, right? And I really I want to look at credit and debt through the lens of it's a tool. So tools are amoral. Tools are neither good nor bad. It's how we end up using those tools that either we can use them for good, we can use them for bad, or we can use them in a way that puts us at risk, right? And so it really becomes about personal behavior with that tool that determines whether or not it is dangerous. This actually just got me thinking about, that old, I think every generation of kids do this at some point. They split out their fingers, their hand, and they put it on a table, and then they use their other finger to pretend like it's a knife. And I was telling my kids the other day, if you do that thing where you're trying to get in between each one of the fingers quickly, right?
It must be a boy thing.
It was my daughter who came to me and was doing this, right? And
I have no idea. I'm sheltered, I guess.
Okay. Well, you just use your finger and you're trying to go and not hit the other person's finger. But then sometimes people up the ante and then they actually do use a knife. And it's that is super dangerous. So again, I go back to the tool analogy, right? If I'm using the knife to cut a steak and I've learned how to do that properly, I'm using the tool for its intended purpose and I'm doing that safely. If all of a sudden I'm doing it to play this really foolish game, well, now I'm not using the tool in the manner in which it was designed. So I just bring that up to say, if we're looking at this through the lens of using the tool and using it in a way that it's designed, I've been able to work with a number of younger adults in their 20s over the last couple of years, and many of them did not have any established credit whatsoever. No credit card, no loans, nothing. And for each of them, as we approach this idea of whether or not to even use, like to apply for a credit card, to use a tool like that, or to avoid it, we go through these education steps. And one of them that I share with them and that I want to make sure our listeners hear is that there are rules for using that tool. And if you have a credit card, the number one rule to a credit card to avoid making a terrible mess and getting yourself into a lot of danger is don't charge anything to the credit card you don't already have the cash to pay for. Now, somebody really smart might ask, well, then why bother using the credit card? And for me, it's about security. We live in a world of stolen identity and getting people's financial information and using that. And I think the credit card has a higher level of security. It's the bank's money that's at risk, not your own personal checking account. And I could get deeper into some of those rules and whatnot, but that's kind of the starting place. Is if you're going to think about using this tool, one of the ways to keep yourself safe and to use the tool properly is to not put anything on the credit card that you don't already have the cash to pay for.
Okay. I think it's also going to be really important to be quite intentional with when you start to ask for that credit, to know what is the purpose of it and then to try to stick with what that purpose was, because otherwise it can be very easy to just kind of get out of control. When you were talking about cutting a steak with a knife, and then I also had another vision of somebody trying to cut a steak with a chainsaw. And it's like, this tool, would it do the trick? Yeah, it would definitely cut the steak, but it would also cut a lot of things around that steak, plate, table, etc. And so it really is important for us to know what sorts of credit would be necessary for different projects, etc., so that we're not overextending ourselves and then getting ourselves into trouble.
I think that's really wise. I think about my own personal experience going into freelancing, and it was about travel, right? And it was, I need to put these travel expenses, I need to take care of these travel expenses. How do I want to do that? Okay, I want to do that on a credit card first, get reimbursed, and then pay it off. And so it allowed me to book my airfare and my lodging and do ride share or whatever the case may be. And into that point, I entered into these conversations with these 20-somes because a lot of them, each one of them that I actually kind of coached on how to use a credit card was they were traveling. We had actually set aside thousands of dollars for travel. And so they had all this, they were liquidating cash for travel. And I said, now that you're going to travel, let's talk about some security measures. Let's talk about how we minimize the risk of your checking account and your cash on hand and transfer some of that risk to the bank through the way of the credit card. And so, again, they had the money to pay for it, but it was like, hey, we're going to use this tool. And then as a icing on the cake moment, certainly not the reason to do it. But if you have like travel rewards on that same credit card, well, now those expenses that you already have cash to pay for, you can use the credit card for security and to build up, these rewards that help you to do the thing that you want to do a little bit more easily. When you want to travel, you have more funds to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, so not only was that like one of the purposes that was identified. But I think, to your point, identifying what is the purpose for the credit line, a credit card, whatever you're getting into debt for, having an awareness of like what is that, and kind of sticking to it. Not only have I done that for like travel, but since then there's a credit card that has all of our reoccurring monthly bills on it, right? So a dedicated purpose for, we just reoccurring, then we have one monthly payment. Of course, we're budgeting for all of those monthly subscriptions up front. So again, we have the cash to pay for it. And so purpose, right? A purpose behind the tool, and knowing what that is. I think that's incredibly wise.
Yeah. One example that I have, I'll share real quick, is when we had bought our home, it was a new build home. And so the backyard had nothing but dirt. And as it was, we had plans to make sure that we had saved up all the cash for all of that. And then as it turned out, we ended up moving. We bought the house in 2019, but we ended up moving into said house on March 31st of 2020. And I don't know if you remember what was going on there, but like the world was ending and it was insane and nobody knew what was happening. And it was just, pretty nuts. And so there were so many unknowns that we actually hit pause on the saving up of the money, because we weren't sure if my husband, who had just gotten his new job in January of 2020, was going to actually have said job for much longer. And so long story short, we hit pause on the whole project, and then we were saving up, but we had not yet gotten to the spot where it was enough. And probably about 5 to 6 months into it, I'm forgetting the timeline a little bit on that, but I want to say it was about 5 or 6 months. I looked at my husband and I said, we need to move on this backyard. And he said, well, we're still a little bit shy of the funds. And he's like, what are we going to do? Where are we going to find that? And so we got creative and we ended up doing a HELOC, which is not something that I would recommend for everybody, but it was a very intentional thing. Because of the way things were, our home had already increased in value. And so we were able to do this no cost refi where we all of a sudden had more than the 20% equity. We were able to get rid of any sort of the insurance that was on that
PMI.
And we had made the decision even prior to that to not put the full 20% down. We had 20%, but we decided not to do all of it so that we could keep some of that cash liquid. So anyway, all of that to say that we did pull the trigger on it. And I am so glad that we did, because it wasn't like 25 minutes after we pulled the trigger that the prices skyrocketed on stuff like the backyards, especially in the area of pool, right? Because that was what everybody was limited to, their own backyards at that point. No one was allowed to go anywhere. And so they started investing in their homes. And because of the demand going up, of course, the cost went up significantly, and it far outpaced any amount of interest that we were paying on that HELOC at the time. And so it's just one of those things where it was a little bit of a gamble, but we went through the actual process in our minds, and we realized this could turn out badly for us, but we didn't just in haste make a decision. We did wait a little bit and just kind of see what the trend was looking like. And man, did we call that correctly, because now we've had the ability to enjoy that backyard for 5 years, and we still have not paid as much in interest as we would have paid in just the base price difference.
Yeah. So I think the net, the key takeaway here is that debt is not something that should be taken lightly, and at the same time shouldn't be completely avoided. That if there are circumstances that make it that the tool is beneficial, that we should learn about what that looks like, how that all plays out, and then make an informed decision about whether or not to actually go ahead and pull that trigger and say, this is what I'm going to do in this situation. The clients I work with who had the travel funds and we ended up going with a credit card, some of them didn't want to do that right away. And so we didn't do that right away. And after they traveled a couple of times and saw some of the risks that I was pointing out, they came back from that travel and said, okay, talk to me a little bit more about what it would look like if we did it with a credit card instead of my debit card, because that I didn't like that. And maybe that was partly just awareness, right? Having become aware of, oh yeah, I am putting myself and my finances at risk that way. So kind of want to transition into our Ask the Coaches question, because it ties similarly to this.
Okay.
Christine had posted, and I'm just going to summarize her post with, should I close my credit cards with annual fees or keep them open to maintain my credit score? And the reason I wanted to address Christine's question is because I think, again, it's rooted in informed decision, right? It's not just yes or no. It's, hey, let's get you some information so that you can make an informed decision on what might be best for your situation. So I wanted to start with the 5 factors that go into a credit score, because knowing how that's built, I think, is going to help somebody make a decision. I think knowing what goes into a credit score is important for you to then understand how your credit score is going to be affected. And I know there's 5 factors. Maria, what is the first of those 5 factors?
Well, payment history is going to be about 35% of the makeup for the entire score. And basically what that means is that, have you had a history of making your payments on time without a bunch of late payments and late fees, etc.? They're just really trying to see what your credit worthiness is. How responsible are you in paying them back?
Yeah, and I think it's noteworthy while closing a credit card isn't going to have a dramatic impact on your payment history, what it is going to do is it's going to eliminate an account that is registering good payment history. And so the history of it to date won't go away, but future would-be payments, even if those payments are zero because there's a zero balance, that history of good standing gets narrowed. The second factor is credit utilization, and that's 30% of the credit score's makeup. And that will definitely take a hit if you close a credit card, because what's happening is your credit score is factoring all of the different credit you have at hand. So your available credit, let's just, to make the numbers really simple, let's say you have $10,000 worth of available credit, and one of those is a credit card with like a $3,000 line of credit. Well, the moment you close that, you go from having an available credit of $10,000 down to $7,000. And if you're using any amount of credit on other accounts, well, now that percentage will have increased, and an increased percentage of utilization actually impacts the credit score negatively. So sometimes closing accounts can have this adverse reaction on your credit score because your utilization percentage is going to be affected.
Yeah, that one always cracks me up just a little bit. It's like, if you don't want them to use it, why give it to them? But I see at the other side of that, if I'm loaning money to somebody, I want to know, are they responsible enough to not completely max that out? So I can see where that is. Do you know off the top of your head what number is a good number? What percentage should we, if somebody wants to stay as a positive utilization score, for example, what's a solid percentage that they're able to use of
That's
their
a great
available
question. It's the same 30% that it accounts for. So it's 30%
simple.
of your score, and banks really want to see you at about 30% utilization or less. When it creeps up to 50% or higher, they start getting nervous, which, again, to your point, if you don't want me to use it, why'd you give it to me? But at the same time, they want to see that you can manage your utilization responsibly. And so 30% or less indicates, oh, okay, you're managing the credit that you do have wisely.
Very good. So speaking of the next thing, we're going to talk about the length of your credit history. That only makes up 15%, but it's also I think, one of the easier ones to sort of manage. And what's very interesting to me is that it takes a long time to build up. Like it's one of the toughest parts to actually keep going because all you have to work with is time. You don't have anything, like it's not what you're doing with it. It's not, I know how much you're using. It's literally how much time you've had that thing open. And so when we are closing down certain credit cards, we would definitely want to do the ones that were more recent rather than the ones that were, it's like our beginning ones. But I will say, I'll just share this small anecdote. There was a card that I was keeping open purely because it had the length of history on there. And because it went for, oh gosh, probably 10 years now without using it, it just completely, they turned it off. And so that was one that was lost but to the history because I was not using it. So if you're chasing a credit score, which I don't necessarily suggest you do, but that would be something where you really have to sort of still use it, even if it's to buy a pack of gum and then pay that off, etc. But that game just was not worth it to me. The juice was not worth the squeeze in that case for me. And so I didn't do that, but I just want everybody to know that I got a letter saying, because you have not utilized this, if you do not, then it will get closed. And it just wasn't worth it to me. But
Yeah.
length of history does have an impact. It's just something that we can't control as well.
Yeah. You bring up an important term that I'm going to take 15 seconds to address, and that is the game, right? Like the credit score ends up being a game. It's a stupid game. It's really convoluted. It is so sided with the banks. And to your point, the bank really owns the relationship. Yes, we can close a credit card anytime, but they are the ones that can just say, we're done with you. This happened to Christina and I a long time ago. That's another story for another day. But I won't do business with the bank that did that because you did that for what purpose? Anyway, so length of history. And to your point, history is an average of all of your accounts. So if you close the ones that you opened more recently, you're actually going to increase the average to those longer accounts. But when you close an account that you've had for a really long time, you actually significantly reduce your average time, and that can have a negative impact. Next up is credit mix. This makes up 10% of your credit score. And what this is they want to see a mixture of what's called installment debt. So things like car loans, personal loans, a mortgage, something that has an installment payment every month, but will eventually be paid off. And then also revolving credit. These are your credit cards. It's an open line. You charge some of it, you pay some of it, you charge some of it, and it's revolving. And they want to see a mix. The more different types of credit you have, the more it favors your credit score. For somebody who just has, say, like 3 credit cards open, well, all they have is revolving credit. And so the banks aren't sure, how would this person manage installment credit or a larger balance or what have you. And so the more the mix, the better, the more you start to eliminate. So when the wife and I closed 13 credit cards and all we had left at that point were student loans and a car loan, we eliminated all of our revolving debt and all we had was installment debt. And of course, our credit took a hit, not just because the mix was down, but now we affected the history, we affected the utilization. So we affected multiple areas of the credit score by making that decision.
Yep. And the final factor that they will consider makes up 10% of the entirety, and that is new credit inquiries. So they're trying to find out, is this person looking for more credit? I think part of that goes into the managing part. Are they managing what they have already? And now are they looking for new credit? And this is something that I have a love-hate relationship with because I'm kind of the mindset, like, if you're not going to give me the credit that I want, then I'm going to go look for a new one, even if I haven't used whatever you had given me, And so this is just like I said before when we're talking about the game, a lot of the decisions that we make are to our best interest. It's like it's at a, you think about it on a case by case basis and ask yourself before, this is what we do, before we ask what exact hit will it have on the credit score, what instead are we trying to use this for, and is it worth that hit that we're going to get? And so those are some of the things that we definitely consider. But the new credit inquiries, that's all that is. So if you go into a car dealership and they're going to run your credit, as they would say, that's not just them finding out about you, that's the credit people knowing that you're looking for a loan, and therefore that will be considered a new inquiry and will start to affect your credit.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think for Christine specifically, who's asking if she should close credit cards with an annual fee or keep them open to maintain the credit score, I think you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to maintain the credit score for? Mm-hmm. Is there a future credit need on the horizon where you want to maintain what you have? And I think the other part of that is understanding these factors around the credit cards you are thinking about closing. Because if one of them is relatively new and maybe you've only had it for like a year, but it has an annual fee, well then, based off of what we talked about, you may actually decide, hey, you know what, that's going to positively affect the credit history while it will negatively affect credit utilization, and kind of weigh the pros and cons there. But this is about making that informed decision. So having these pieces of information at the ready, knowing that if you close accounts, it is going to affect things like length of history, utilization, and even future payment history, then you can make an informed decision on whether or not closing the credit card is right for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would also just, since we haven't talked about fees at all, and that was part of her question, I'm just kind of curious, what are some of your thoughts around those credit cards with fees? And she did say credit cards, plural. And
True.
so, I've heard some arguments that are for having a card that has a fee because, you get X amount of whatever. They're usually around the travel cards. So if somebody travels a lot and they get their baggage that is checked baggage and that's free, I could see some of the arguments there. But again, each individual argument has to be just that. It has to be individualized, because if you are the type who travels and always takes a carry-on, then you don't need to factor in the fact that you would get a free checked bag because you don't use that anyway. And so I know I gave you a little more information than I should have just by asking a question, but I am curious, what are your thoughts on the credit card fees in general?
It's all good. So I want to differentiate two different types of credit cards with fees. One is when you have really poor credit, you're going to get a credit card that has a fee attached to it because they feel like they're doing you a favor. And I despise those. So those are the types that when it makes sense to get away from them as fast as you can and get into something that's a little bit more consumer focused rather than bank focused. To your point, a lot of travel cards come with an annual fee, and it depends on what those benefits really are and if you are taking advantage of those benefits. I know for me, when I opened up a credit card for travel because I was doing the freelancing stuff, I looked around and I wanted to make sure that I was getting something that was going to tie to an airline, first of all, that I actually want to fly, because I'm sorry, there are certain airlines I'm not interested in flying on if I don't have to. And then when I started to look at those, it's what are the benefits that come with the annual fee? And so for the one that I chose, the annual fee covers a companion ticket. Like each year for that, I think it's $195. For $195, my wife can fly with me wherever I go. So yeah, that works, right? And I get free checked baggage, one for each person traveling. So when the family of 4 travels to New York, all four of us are bringing our checked luggage for free. And so those benefits, I said, okay, you know what, for $195, sure. Like that, those are strong benefits.
And especially if you were using them anyway. And what I mean by that is if you were already planning to travel with your children somewhere, then that's one thing. I think that there is a trap that people can fall into, and that's I'm going to buy this thing so that I can use the benefits. Timeshares come to mind with that. And so it's like, I'm going to buy this thing so that I can use the benefits, and then they may utilize them. But if they wouldn't have utilized them prior to seeing that, then is it just them convincing themselves that it's a good deal and that might be something they want to use? And so I think that's the other piece of it too. If it's something that it's just a good deal and you want to use it and you have the funds to do that, that's one thing. But don't go finding a card that has a high annual fee just so that it quote unquote forces you into traveling, because if you didn't have the means for that before, then this is actually just gonna get you in more trouble rather than give you more freedom.
Yeah, that's true. All right, and so our challenge of the week, if you're not already peeking in on your score, there are free services out there that will allow you to do that. I challenge you to go and take a look at your credit profile, see what the score is, see how things are affecting it, what accounts are open, what standing are those accounts in, and maybe specifically pay attention to your utilization rate. Maybe that's something, maybe you check in on your score from time to time, but maybe you haven't paid attention to your utilization rate. So take a look at that. Look at these 5 factors and just see, what decisions could you be making to improve your credit profile. And not because you want to chase a credit score, but so that you are in control of your financial landscape.
Sounds great. Challenge accepted.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Christ-Centered Stewardship Podcast. Follow us on your favorite social media platform for more encouragement and support. And until next time, may the Lord keep you in perfect peace as you set your sight on Jesus.